Well, hello and welcome to the Hayden Clark Show. My name is Hayden Clark, your host, and I'm excited for today's interview. I have a special guest with me, Ben Watkins. Ben, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to have you, and I'm going to have you introduce yourself. But before I do, I always forget this part. Uh, if you enjoy the show here, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, leave a review on the podcast if you're listening, share it with your friends, of course. And if you benefit from this, consider supporting us on Patreon. There's a link in the description, or it's simply patreon.com/Hayden Clark. All right, Ben, again, thanks so much for joining me. I'm excited to have you on. I've seen you around the interwebs on Twitter and, of course, the YouTube channel, podcast, all of that. And of course, you did a debate recently, and it's. I think that might have solidified for me. This is a really genuine. I mean, I always suspected all along this is just a really genuine guy on the opposing side from me as a theist, and so I really like listening to thoughtful atheists and agnostics who take arguments seriously, take the philosophy of religion seriously, and I think that's who you are. Hope you don't prove me wrong. No, I'm just kidding. I know you are. But anyway, that's kind of how I became familiar with you, just kind of hanging out in those circles on the interwebs. So, yeah, I really am happy to have you on. And for those who don't know you, I thought it might be helpful to give a brief introduction.
So my name is Benjamin Blake Speed Watkins. Yes, that is my real name. I wasn't there
Nice.
when my parents gave it to me, but it does make me easily to find on social media and Google. So I just kind of take advantage of it. I live with my wife and daughter in Norfolk, Virginia. And I work as a nuclear engineer by day, and I'm an internet philosopher / Hegelian by night. I am the host of Real Atheology, a philosophy of religion podcast, where we explore questions in the philosophy of religion from non-theist perspectives.
Very good. And there are links in the description to the Real Atheology website and YouTube channel. I'm sure you can find the podcast on one of those if you want to go to that as well, or just go wherever you get your podcast. You can type it in there, I'm sure. But tell me about your history with religion. Were you previously a theist? A lot of atheists that I talked to were previously theists, so I don't know if that was your story. If not, just kind of tell me what your story is.
Yes, so I was raised a theist in the deep south of South Carolina, in a very conservative, evangelical, Quaker-like tradition.
Cool.
And so I began to doubt my faith kind of after I graduated from college when I was about 23 or 24. And by about 25 or 26, I was just very, very deep in the philosophy of religion. And so when I had started to doubt my faith, philosophy of religion and apologetics in particular, was kind of a gateway for me into philosophy more broadly. And so it was just kind of natural to dive into the philosophy of religion because there's just so many points in philosophy that philosophy of religion touches on. Just a cursory glance through the questions in the philosophy of religion, and you end up in philosophy of mind, you end up in ethics, you end up in metaphysics, you end up in epistemology. You just end up everywhere. And so I've just continued that project and kind of using that as my base for building my own worldview. Kind of once I stood on the ashes of, the old worldview that I had outgrown, there was this now lifelong project of building a new worldview.
Yeah. Did you say that you were or were not familiar with the apologetic side of theism while you were still a theist?
Well, so I was not familiar with the term apologetics, nor
Okay.
was I familiar with, someone who did apologetics. However, I was aware that there were resources
Hmm.
for diving into my faith. So when I graduated from college, I kind of had one of those, growing up existential moments of, well, I've got to get all of my life in line now.
Right.
So I was reading on personal finance, about how to,
Nice.
get money straight. But then I was also looking into this, I'd been having doubts with my own faith. And so I was like, okay, now's the time to dig into what is it that I actually believe about religion. And so there was no moment where like, a light switched for me. It was a very waning process. It was, I'd come come to a problem and get stumped on that problem. And then I'd move to another problem and I'd get stumped on that problem. And then and it just kind of kept going. And so I'd modify and chip away at my view until finally one day it was just unrecognizable. I was like, I'm so far from where I started. Where am I now?
Right.
And so from there, I just kind of landed in the metaphysical naturalist / secular humanist camp.
Yeah. And at what point does the real atheology begin, and kind of how did that get started?
So Real Atheology is a project that was started by Justin Schieber, who was of Reasonable Doubts. And so this was kind of his project that wanted to explore philosophy of religion seriously from non-theistic perspectives.
Is Reasonable Doubts, is that a pun on reasonable faith? It just clicked on me.
I think so.
Okay.
I'd have to ask him to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure. So I wasn't part of that project. So I'm, kind of outside of that project. I was brought on to Real Atheology by Justin Schieber.
Awesome.
We were trying to fill in, kind of a hole that we saw in the secular circles that we were a part of. And that was this, very robust, philosophically and scientifically informed way of thinking about big questions in the philosophy of religion. And so we would read literature on both sides, the best, most up-to-date literature. We would develop our own arguments. We would debate apologists. We interview professional philosophers. And so one of the projects, since I've taken the helm of the project, is to kind of see what religious concepts can look like without perfect being theism. So it's this idea of saying, hey, atheists at their core are committed to taking these models of God and just doing away with those models of God. Well, what if we could have other models of the divine? What could those look like? What could religion evolve into? What can fill that, God-shaped hole, to use the kind of colloquial metaphor? And so just exploring that and seeing what we can salvage of our religious concepts. Once something like superstition and dogma are kind of shed, and a more humanist ethic and naturalist metaphysic are put in their place.
What models of God did you have in mind opposed to perfect being theology?
So there's several models that I find quite plausible. So the pantheistic model, so the idea that the divine is just another concept that refers to nature. And so that these are two sides of the same coin. I also like religious traditions that don't have metaphysical baggage. So Buddhism is a good example of this, where you will find a form of life and a philosophy, a way of, that it'll point you down the path, but it will explain to, part of the philosophy is that you have to go down the path yourself. And so it gives you tools for living a life. And so there's also other models like Taoism, where it's like 81 poems, I think it is. And so you just run through the Tao Te Ching, and they're different ways. These are poems that you would think about over the course of your entire life. And what they are just different ways of helping you step back and see the world differently. And so there isn't anything kind of, metaphysic that you have to adopt in order to understand these forms of life that we can properly call religious.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to ask, is it sounds like religion without God. And is that possible?
I think it's very possible.
Okay.
So I actually think that monotheism is a pretty late and local, more recent development. So most of human history has not had this monotheistic concept of God. Most, pre-human civilization, or the earliest religious concepts were animist, so that they saw divine spirits within the animals that they hunted, the plants that they harvested, or were surrounded by. Those were the kind of religious concepts that really are the hallmark of the earliest human civilizations. And it wasn't really until the time of Moses, that time period in history, when there's this monotheistic God, this idea of there's just one supreme God. Anything else is just kind of subservient to this.
But even in animalism or pantheism or something like that, you're still talking about something divine.
Yes, something worthy of our reverence and awe.
I guess originally I was thinking you were talking about religion that would square with someone like yourself, an atheist or even an agnostic, and to me that would be ruling out anything divine. So maybe I missed actually the context of this whole conversation, but is that not what you were getting at when you were talking about finding some kind of religion that an atheist could use, or were you just talking about different religions altogether?
Well, yeah, so there's different, I consider there's different models of the divine. And so do I think that we're in possession of the one right model of what the divine would be? I don't know. I don't think so. But I also recognize that our religious concepts are fairly new. Religious concepts have only been on the scene for, something like 60,000 years of history. And if, we're to suppose that we have another 60,000, 100,000, 500,000 years, what are these religious concepts going to look like? Are they going to, some people think that, this is just going to die out. It's just everyone's going to become atheist, and then there's just going to be no religion. Nothing's going to replace it. It's just going to completely die out. And it's just a spandrel that just serves no purpose anymore. I don't think that's right. I think that we were selected for kind of a religious sense. And I think that this religious sense serves an evolutionary purpose at a social level. There were social reasons why we evolved this sense, and it's with us as long as we still have the human nature that we were selected for, and we've turned something like natural selection off at this point. If we continue to have that same nature, we're still going to have religious concepts. We're still going to have this need for fellowship and communion, these feelings of, a desire for salvation, or, explanations for feelings of awe and reverence and gratitude. There's just so many forms of life that are part of that. We say the word religion, but that's really, a basket of different forms of life. People say it's really hard to define what a religion is. Well, that's because it encompasses so much. Mm-hmm. And so if you just throw one model of God out, it doesn't seem to me like you've done away with religion at all. You still have the forms of life. All you've rejected as an atheist, at the most, is theism. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think limiting our religious concepts also to that very narrow concept model of God is also, I think, a product of, kind of our Western bias. Mm-hmm. Like we say, if this is just gone, well, then everything's gone. That moves too fast.
So, I mean, if it moves too fast, and if there are some other concepts of the divine that need to be explored, is atheist too strong of a title to attribute to yourself?
No, so I think that the sense in which I consider myself an atheist is that I believe that the claims that theists make are false. And I'm also a naturalist. And so I think that some of the claims that I'm committed to as a naturalist imply that theism is false. So there's kind of two sides to the, have my sympathies with a view that implies
Uh-huh.
theism is false, but it doesn't imply these other religious traditions are false. It only implies that perfect being theism is false.
Okay. Well, that's
See what I'm saying?
interesting to me because something like then I was tracking right from the beginning then. But it seems to me that, so that's clarifying. Thank you. Um, but it seems to me that as a naturalist, you can't think too much of animalism or pantheism or panpsychism or any of these other models that are not perfect being theism because they still imply some kind of divine or supernatural, don't they? And so that would mean as a
I don't think
naturalist,
so. So
okay,
the
okay,
so to give examples, to
sorry.
use two examples, pantheism and panpsychism. And so to take the first one, the pantheist, we agree that there's just the natural world, that there's, that the world is causally closed, and, there's the universe, and that's it. So ontologically, I have the same views as the pantheist. So what does the pantheist say that some metaphysical naturalists don't want to say, or try to resist? Which is that the divine, what is worthy of our worship and worthy of our awe, is nature. Like that's just it. Like when you look at the universe, when are awed by the wonders of the universe and the intricacies of the molecular world, like, and you feel awe and reverence, I think those are appropriate responses. So again, I agree with the pantheist in these claims. It seems that the only claim that the pantheist makes that the naturalist resists is that the divine is identical to nature. And so the naturalist might just say, well, there's just no reason to say it. We can say all these other things and agree with him. We just don't have to make that claim. So it's really just kind of a superficial label disagreement, really, to my mind. Panpsychism is just the idea that mind is fundamental all the way down. And so someone like Galen Strawson is a materialist, but he says, I'm a real materialist. Well, what is that? How does putting real at the beginning of materialist, distinguish you from other views? And because he's a panpsychist, because he says, look, that, conscious experience is something that's fundamental. And this idea sounds crazy, this panpsychist idea that, even molecules have, some bits of proto-conscious experience to them. It sounds crazy, but it's actually the simplest way of solving something like the mind-body problem while also making sense of qualitative experiences like the taste of strawberry within a model that he's calling materialist. That I would use the word naturalist, because materialist, there's more baggage that comes along with the term materialist than naturalist, and naturalist comes with enough baggage as it is.
I want to talk about
So
that actually. I know it wasn't in the set of questions I answered, but you or gave you. But if you'll indulge me, what is
for
the
sure,
difference between a naturalist and a materialist or a physicalist?
how they cash it out. There's
Yeah.
really, so it's just
Are you
it's
also
one
a
of,
materialist and a physicalist, or you just
so yeah, I could say that, but I would cash all of those labels out in the same terms, and so they would for me become synonymous.
me too?
Like
So
that for
that's
me,
why I've
for
always wondered.
simplicity, I don't find any use in drawing the distinctions between um, natural, physical, or material. I know
Mhm.
people do draw distinctions, and I'm sure those distinctions are very useful in the language games that they're using.
Well,
But
I think it's useful in some of the ways that people argue for naturalism. I'm not saying yourself or any of the people that you would follow do, but I mean, I've just in conversations with naturalists, they'll want to draw a distinction between naturalism and supernaturalism, and then give naturalism a higher, lower prior probability just because it posits one less sort of thing. All things are natural, but it's just like, well, okay, I don't think that God, in that case, fine. I don't think that God is supernatural. I think he's perfectly natural. Unless you mean the word natural is synonymous with material or physical, then okay. But then I don't know why we're calling it natural.
Yeah, so I see the natural supernatural divide as kind of lining up with a physical non-physical divide
Me
or a
too.
material non-material divide. And so again, to me it just seems like all of those can just be used synonymous. I'm talking about the causal domain.
Yeah.
What does the causal domain consist of? Does it consist of matter and physical things? Yes. Is that nature? Yes. Do I think that there's, something ontologically distinct, the supernatural? No. I think that natural reality exhausts causal reality. And if you want to call that causal reality the material reality, awesome. If you want to call that reality a physical reality, awesome. If you want to call that a neutral something and that they've got two different aspects, a mental and a physical, awesome. At the end of the day, I'm a monist. I'm an ontological monist. I think that when it comes to the causal domain, there's just one thing. It's just one sort of ontological stuff. And that's what we have. And so that might be a universal wave function. That might be, that's what we call
Physical
matter.
Symbols or something.
Yeah. There's quarks, there's bosons, there's electrons, there's all of these things that science say are part of the standard model. I'm on board with what quantum, mechanics says. These are the observations from weird experiments in quantum mechanics. I accept the implications of those empirical experiments, and so I'm not trying to butt up against science, but I would insist on philosophical grounds that there's just one sort of causal stuff, and that there isn't something beyond the causal domain that we describe with nature.
Okay. That makes sense then. Thanks for clarifying that. Perhaps we've already touched on this question, but what do you think the strongest arguments in favor of atheism are? Or if not atheism, then naturalism, I suppose. That's what I was meaning. We might have already touched on it.
No, it's fair. So arguments for naturalism are arguments for atheism, because naturalism implies atheism.
Good point.
So we'll start with theism, because unlike many of my atheist peers, I don't subscribe to the dogma that there just is no evidence for theism. I think that's kind of a mantra. I think if you understand evidence probabilistically, that's just clearly not true.
But if you push them, they always end up meaning, whether they admit it or not, they always mean there's no good evidence. But it's obviously
I think a lot of people in my own camp just don't think seriously enough about the concept of evidence. As much as they emphasize evidence and use all the slogans about evidence, their concept of what evidence is very lacking. And so when people say, "Oh, philosophy doesn't have any job," that's one area where I point go up. Nope. It definitely has a job here.
Yeah, not to mention that's an interesting philosophical perspective.
Yeah, on all sides. It's one of those things. If you want to have a conversation about comparing worldviews, you're going to have to appeal to evidence. Yeah. And if you can't have a working concept of evidence that all parties to the discussion can agree on, you're the one lacking. You're the one coming to the discussion without that concept. And I think if whatever the most plausible concept of evidence is, it is going to concede to the theist that there are some observations that count in favor of theism. There's just no way to get around it. If you deny that, then you just have an implausible account of evidence. We can flesh that out once we finally pin down what that concept is that they're using. It will be very simple to show that that's just an implausible account of evidence. Anyways,
there you go.
It's one of my pet peeves within my own camp.
Get up there on that stool. I don't care.
I know, right? So I don't think that there are any particularly strong arguments for theism, but I do think that there's at least 4 modest arguments for theism that we can say, look, these are evidential chips that fall in favor of theism. if we're just dispensing with burdens of justification and following evidence where it leads, these 4 chips fall in favor of theism. And so I think the first is moral agency. So the fact that there are moral agents in the world is more likely on theism than naturalism. Why? Because theism implies the existence of at least one moral agent, God. So the probability of observing a moral agent on theism is 1.
Yeah.
Now, naturalism just cannot make any similar claim. There is just no implication of naturalism that can come close.
Can I just say that as a theist, I wouldn't even agree with that. But anyway, that would be a different discussion.
Fair enough. But another straightforward chip, I think, is the fact that people have religious experiences and cogent religious experiences that move people to change their very forms of life. Theism gives us a very ready explanation for why people have religious experiences.
Yeah.
Because they're communicating with the divine. Now, do I think that evidence is undercut by other facts? Yes, but we won't get into that right now. Straightforward, if we're just in a vacuum talking about which better predicts religious experiences, it's theism. Beauty is, I think, another one. Now, I realize this is a controversial datum. Not everyone believes that aesthetic properties are in the world.
For real, yeah.
But I do. I am a realist about aesthetic properties. So, and I think aesthetic properties are more likely given theism than naturalism. Naturalism doesn't give us any reason to predict aesthetic properties, properties that something like, Mozart would have. Like, naturalism just isn't going to explain that like theism can. And so then I think the last one, which is, again, controversial, but I think it's interesting, is if the universe began to exist, if it was finite. Like, I think it's still an open question whether or not the universe began to exist or is finite. I'm inclined to think that it's eternal, but I can't, I wouldn't bet my house on it. No way.
Right.
But I think that's, if the steady state view of the universe was to favor naturalism, and something like creation ex nihilo, a beginning to the universe, was to favor something like theism, well, then you just have to let the evidential chips fall where,
Yeah.
This is how the chip fell. This one falls in favor of theism.
Well, I think that's all very honorable of you. And this was something I was going to mention earlier, and you just kind of demonstrated it, which is what reminded me of it. But I was raised on Dawkins and the rest of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and I just can't help but notice in recent times, perhaps it's even earlier than recent times, but in recent times it seems like more people are moving into this camp that I would say that you are in, which is, just thoughtful atheists. I don't know how else to say that. Very, actually doing the philosophy of religion type of atheist instead of I guess the best
real
way to
real atheologians.
Yeah, atheologians.
Real atheologians. There we go.
Do you think more people are moving into that camp?
No, I wish they were, and that's the tide I'm trying to turn.
I think they are.
I can't get people in my camp to even budge on the definition of atheism. It's embarrassing.
Oh, that's funny. That's a good one.
It drives me absolutely insane. Where I just go, look, you're not conceding anything to the theist.
That's the point. Is just everything is about winning.
Like if we cannot even agree on the terms we're going to use, on the rules of the language game, why are you here? Like, what is the conversation that you want to have where you're just going to say no? You're going to play my language game or no language game at all.
And of course, you'll find mirror images on the theist side, and if I belong in the shitty theist camp, I'm sorry. I don't think that I do, but anyway. Yeah, I was just wondering if you thought that the tides were turning. I guess you're more pessimistic than I am, but I thought that they were, but I guess I could be wrong.
I don't feel it. Maybe
Yeah.
they are. So I don't have it. So again, these are my hunches. I don't have any sort of empirical data to
Right,
back
me
this up.
either. That's why I was asking if anybody else. That's why I was
Um,
asking if anybody else felt the same way. But
but we're definitely trying. We felt like it was a hole in
well,
the
you have a giant following.
now. It wasn't always that way.
I wonder if most of them are theists.
But probably. So I feel like I get I am much more. Theists are less hostile to me than other
Well,
atheists. Believe it or
so
not.
you will find, and I'm sure you get this criticism from those in that other atheist camp, like theists in disguise, or because I see this mirror image in politics as well. Anybody that dares to think outside the box is accused by one side or the other as being a Democrat in disguise or a Republican in disguise. So
Yeah.
probably people play that game with you, and there probably are theists who are only butting up to you because you are somewhat nice atheists. But more likely, or on the other side of things, there's probably a lot of theists who you're going to be able to convince to switch camps. I mean, not that you are trying to convince them, but they will be convinced by your level-headedness.
Maybe. In my experience, what I've found is theists that are excited to finally have a discussion in a serious way about questions that they find very interesting already. And that for like something like me, who's familiar with the literature on both sides of this debate and are willing to have these sorts of discussions, are just things that aren't found often in my circles, which is why I'm pessimistic that there's all these people flocking into this more rational camp. Because when you just ask theists their interactions with atheists, it's often very smug attitudes. It's kind of dodgy, point counterpoint, but avoid giving any specific arguments, only tearing down theistic models, but not offering any models of their own. And
it's because that goes back to the definition.
Yeah, I was
if you're a lack theist, you don't have any burden, you don't need to build anything up.
I recently got to debate Trent Horn, and so he and I kind of hung out the whole weekend before the debate, and we were, so we talked a ton of philosophy, as just as much as we could. And he was making this point about people that he's debated with in the past, where I think the name, I won't use the name just in case I'm not supposed to do that. He was like, I gave arguments and he just didn't respond to my arguments like at all. And, when confronted during the debate, well, why aren't you responding to the arguments that I gave? And he just kind of dismissed them with, yeah, but those are just words. Those are just words up there. And that's all sophistry.
Arguments are not evidence.
Yeah. Basically saying this, and, Trent was like, he's like, it feels so defeating to get up to have invested so much time,
right, to have done
and so much effort to get, because before a debate, you're nervous, you're thinking about all the different moves that could be going on, going back and forth, and you get up there, you have all this work done, and then they're just not even meeting you on that ground at all.
You never imagined that you were going to have to go up there and defend the legitimacy of an argument per se.
Yeah. It's or you just end up talking past each other, and so someone keeps saying, well, so and so believes, well, and the other person's like, well, no, I don't actually believe that. I believe this, and it's we try to minimize that as much as possible.
Well, you got a lot of compliments, including some directly from Trent Horn. That must have felt
it felt awesome,
like a really awesome accomplishment.
Well, yeah, and so behind the scenes, we both, we had told each other, we were like, hey, we're being invited to this event. This is a Protestant event, and a Catholic is being invited, and an atheist is being invited. So, like, we're not, like, Trent's more home team than I am. in this, but like,
right. It's the one time Protestants are like, go Catholic.
Yeah. So we're like, we have to raise the level of discourse in this exchange. Like, we have to give a good debate. Like, the word that I'm really liking right now is, let our arguments clash with each other as much as possible, so that people can watch this and take a lot away from it for years to come. They can come back, like, oh, well, I wonder what it would look like if a naturalist and a Catholic had a debate, a serious debate. We did that.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about this even before y'all's debate, but y'all's debate was just another example. But when at one point Dr. Craig says that Graham Oppie is by far the most challenging, or I can't think of the exact wording, but he just paid a really high compliment to Graham Oppie, and I thought, man, that has got to feel good when your opponent pays you a really high compliment. You must have done a good job. And so I thought, and then I saw that with Trent Horn and yourself, and I thought that's got to feel pretty good.
Yeah. But, Josh Rasmussen came up to me afterwards and complimented me on the debate that we had, and it really felt good. Like, to have Josh Rasmussen come up and like,
it's hard not to get big headed. Yeah.
It really is. It really is. I was just like, oh man, thanks, man. Like, and like so I had a copy of his book, How Reason Can Lead to God, and so like he signed my book for me,
sweet.
And like and so it was a lot of fun, and it was the camaraderie was really like, at the end of the day, we had everyone there had radically different views in some respect, but we were all there really because of philosophy. That's really what brought us together.
Will you look back on this? I'm curious. I'm just a curious person, I guess. Will you look back on this debate with Trent and think that was the breakthrough moment? Because it seems like a lot of people know who you are now. And maybe they already did. Maybe I didn't know that, but it seems like...
Certainly, I think it is a breakthrough moment in the sense that, just like you said, my exposure has increased because of it. If I had to pick a kind of breakthrough moment, it would have been about a little over a year ago now, when I debated Friar Gregory Pine.
Oh, okay. I didn't know you did that. That'd be another good one.
Yeah. So on Pints with Aquinas, I debated Friar Gregory, and I don't know if you've ever spoken with Friar Gregory Pine. He's as cool a dude as you think he is.
Mm-hmm. I haven't had him on the show, but I have listened to him. Yeah.
He was so much fun. He was so gracious. And, but it was my first opportunity to have that, kind of big stage. And I had been working on a classical theist / Thomist project since like 2017 or something. Like we started it thinking, oh, we'll do like 6 months of like a Thomist / No, it's turned into like, now a 4-year project. Like,
well, you'll either have to cut yourself off or it'll become a lifetime project.
Yeah, it's I really cannot emphasize, like, anyone listening, like, I really cannot overemphasize just how deep, there is no just skimming over the classical theist tradition.
They don't fully understand Aquinas. People like Father Gregory Pine, and they just...
you could devote your entire life to thinking about it. And so it's just for me, it's just another way I've expanded my philosophy of religion arsenal. I just have this other tradition that I'm familiar with, like, listen to me talk about, like, I'm semi-familiar with.
Sure, I mean, I know what you mean.
Becoming much more familiar, but like I can talk in different models of God. I've done a project on presuppositional apologetics. I've done, one on natural theology in the, theistic personalist tradition. So like I can move from model of God to model of God. And it's just amazing how much your purview opens when you decide to jump in and tackle something like that.
Yeah, it's my perspective has been expanded a lot by reading some of these more theistic personalist types, because, man, I won't say when it first hit the scene, but whenever it has become more popular in recent years and first came across my spectrum, at least, I was just like, I don't know how anybody thinks this, but this is someone who comes from more of a classical theist background. And so, but reading the actual literature has broadened my perspective. And I didn't mean, I don't know how anybody thinks this disrespectfully. I mean, just because I didn't even know that was on the table. I've just always assumed it was classical, perfect being theist, or, a totally different religion. But yeah. And I followed William Lane Craig for the longest time without even realizing that he had such strong critiques of classical theism. And that wasn't a turnoff for me. I still think, because I just wasn't studying him for those purposes. I was studying Craig's work for what he's.
But he gives a defense of mere theism too.
Right.
He has
so when he gives
his
the Kalam and
theology
stuff,
disagreements, but
you can't tell that he's going to have such strong words against divine simplicity or something, like, which is actually, in some sense, I think Craig does agree with divine simplicity, but he just thinks everything is divinely simple. But anyway, that's a totally different topic.
Importantly, he thinks that God's in time.
Yes. Yeah. He thinks that God is not timeless, but he was timeless. Yeah, that's the thing. Is, golly,
he wasn't. He was timeless prior to creation, and
right? Which to me is an impossible change of affairs. But that's another topic for a discussion.
That's a disagreement in your camp.
Yeah, that's one in my camp. We've talked. Did you? Unless you had something else to say, but go ahead.
I was going to move into the arguments for atheism. So we talked about the arguments for theism. So I think that there are two pretty strong arguments for atheism. And so I think those are the argument from evil and the argument from divine hiddenness. So I think the reason why these arguments are so strong is because they just admit of very strong formulations. There's deductive formulations of each one. And so they're very big chips that I think fall in favor of atheism. And then I think there's about 4 modest lines of evidence that kind of chips that fall in favor of atheism. And so the first is the physical dependence of minds. So the fact that all of the minds that we're acquainted with and non-controversial examples of mental activity all have physical structures that they depend on, embodied brains. So everything from humans to other mammals, all mental activity we know, physical basis.
This is my argument against the. I just want to jump in if that's okay. This is why I don't buy into the theistic personalist camp right here, because when Craig says something like God is a disembodied mind, I think that's not even possible.
Yeah. I think if you conceive of God as a disembodied mind, then the physical dependence of mind is just a straightforward observation that counts against that view.
Yeah.
And so another chip, I think, is biological evolution. So I think special creation is what theism would predict. And I think that biological evolution is what a mindless chance process like naturalism would predict. Widespread religious disagreement, I think that's another chip. So I think that there would be a relative, religious consensus if there was this perfect being that cared about, what we believed, why we believed it, depended our salvation on it. The secular success of science. So I think it's, the more secular that the natural science have gotten, the more successful they've been. So the very mechanism for their success was removing God from the picture. And so I think that's very surprising. I think that if theism was true, that it would predict that God's actions would be events in the world that our best sciences would have to account for. But because we don't have to account for them, I think that's evidence for atheism or naturalism rather than theism. And so those are the 4, I think. I'm kind of still on the fence about a 5th, the hostility of the universe towards life. I think that's surprising. But I think that's also a pretty weak chip. That's a smaller chip. That's doesn't have anything near the evidential weight.
Would that not fit with a problem of evil, or?
It could. So that is exactly like how much of this argument is a unique chip, and how much of it is just a rendition of another argument, like the argument from evil, because you don't want to double count evidence.
Right.
That's like when if you're trying to let evidential chips fall, it's very important that we don't double count evidence.
Oh,
and
yeah,
so
or your
how
probability is
much?
going to be,
Yeah, exactly. So like when you're using something like a probability calculus and you're understanding evidence probabilistically, it's really, really important to demark all the assumptions that you're using. You know, your probabilistic model is only as good as the assumptions that you're plugging into it. And so you want to be able to demarcate all those assumptions and put and line everything up, so that you're only counting each observation that you're appealing to stands on its own. It's probabilistically independent. It's not somehow, just another way of saying this other chip, or is using the same assumption. If you made an assumption over here in this argument from evil, and you're using that same assumption here to, in the argument from the hostility of the universe, you've double counted the evidence by doing that. Yeah. And so that's one way to help you not make that mistake.
I want to ask you a question about the argument from evil, if that's okay. And if it's not something that you've thought deep enough about to answer on, I won't take it as I got you. Just say I haven't thought about that, and I'll move on to something else, because I didn't send you this question ahead of time. Is why I'm prefacing.
These are my favorite kinds of questions.
Okay, well, good. But so I'm thinking along the lines of something, and only because I don't know a lot of people who have responded to this. Maybe you'll have a prima facie answer. Maybe you have already thought about this. But Brian Davies has a book. He's a Catholic philosopher.
The reality of evil, yes.
And basically
the reality of God is the problem of evil.
The strongest point in that book, in my opinion, is that actually God is not a moral agent. Whenever we get down to it, whenever we say God is good, we don't mean morally good. And so you couldn't make moral predictions about what he would do or not do, about evil, about stopping evil, about preventing evil, however you want to phrase it. How does that affect the problem of evil, if at all? And kind of what are your thoughts on that, since it sounds like you are familiar with it?
Yeah. So my philosophy mentor is a Thomist. So Dr. William Brenner. I have one of his papers right here. I gotta mark up notes for him before Sunday. I better get on that.
I'm sorry, are you in school?
I'm not currently. I currently have a child. It's on hold.
I was just wondering if this was like a professor or what.
Yeah, so he is a former professor of mine, but he's since retired. But he still writes, and he still helps me with my writing. And so
cool.
We try to meet every Sunday and just kind of.
Okay, so it's just kind of a relationship y'all have. I was wondering if it was more formal, like teacher student. That's why I was asking.
No. Yeah. So he gave me Brian Davies' book very early in my philosophy career, and so it was actually one of the first kind of real attempts to look at the problem of evil for me from a Thomist perspective. And so this idea that God is not a moral agent. And so I think that when we're looking at the problem of evil, what have we denied when we say that God is a moral agent? And it seems to me that we've denied God's moral perfection. Mm-hmm. And so can we do that? And I think that there's a problem for this move. I think the problem for this move is that we don't actually start from, this perfect being. We start from this idea of being wholly worthy of our worship. So the central claim of what I call perfect being theism is that there is a being that always demands our worship, our attention, and our reverence. That's his, and Anselm says, the greatest possible being. It's been described as, a maximally great being, a being of none greater that can be conceived. So it's this idea of just maximally worth worship. And so when we have that concept, what could be of most moral value? So if we think that morality has this kind of overriding feature, it's this feature that's trumps all other concerns, this moral feature. So what could be of most moral value? Well, the answer to that question is a perfect being that had these properties, that cared about us and would make things go impartially best for everyone. That would be a maximally great being. And so it just seems like what we're denying when we say that God is not a moral agent is that we're saying that God just isn't this maximally great being. And so that just seems that seems like a huge cost that once you've taken, yeah. So the payoff is that you avoid the problem of evil, because there just isn't a tension between moral perfection and the evils in the world, because it denies moral perfection.
So if you could avoid what you see as the opportunity cost, it would be a escape from the problem of evil.
Yes, by denying that God is morally perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Very good.
Because the problem only arises because we have an omnipotent and morally perfect being. Mm-hmm. So an omnipotent being could eliminate all unjustified evil. A morally perfect being would be maximally motivated to do so. Well, take the maximal moral being out of the equation.
Yeah.
There's no problem now. There's no tension. There's no problem of evil in that view.
Well, I'm just happy that you've even heard of this objection, because a lot of people that I come in contact with either haven't, and these people probably haven't either, but their knee-jerk response is always that actually I haven't escaped the problem of evil anyway, even if what I said was true, which I'm just like, and they always have a reason, but it's never very good. I think
the bigger whole. So my professor is a Thomist, like I said. Mm-hmm. So where I pressed back the most when I was working through Brian Davies Brian Davies endorses what's known as the privation theory of evil. And so he doesn't see God as a moral agent, but he does see, he doesn't even see God as a being among beings. He sees God as the ground of being itself. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that he is whatever he wills with substance, form, and being just is goodness. That's what it means for the world to be like it just has. And so like if we perceive evil in the world, it's because there's some form, substance, and being that is missing. And if we were to add this substance, form, and being to this thing, it would then be good. And so that's the privation view of evil. And so that's where I push back. I wanted to say that view is false.
Well, I'm inclined towards that view, but I don't think that just that alone solves a lot, because some people would just say that, well, evil doesn't exist anyway. It's a privation, and just pretend like that alone is a response to the problem of evil, because all you have to do is reword the problem.
Well, yeah, you'd still have a problem of the missing good.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you just need to reword things. So, I mean, I think it's...
So the problem that it's originally trying to solve, I think it's with Anselm. Someone correct me in the comments if I'm mistaken, but I'm pretty sure it begins with Anselm, and he goes, look, God sustains everything in being. Like, how could he sustain evil? That'd be weird. How could this, being that's wholly good, there are no imperfections in God. How can it be the case that he sustains something like evil in being? Mm-hmm. And so this was the payoff of the view is he doesn't. Evil doesn't have positive being in the world. Kind of, we can use an analogy nowadays. Darkness doesn't have any positive being in the world. Right. Coldness doesn't have any being in the world. Darkness is just the absence of light, and coldness is just the absence of molecular kinetic energy.
Right.
And so it's something like that. And so if you want to, you could just, if you wanted to get rid of dark, you could just add light to it.
Yeah. Well, why isn't there more light? That like just rewording things, but
Exactly. Yeah. But that's the general strategy of getting out. So that's Brian Davies endorses the privation
Privation
theory of
view.
evil
Yeah.
in that book. And so does my mentor, Dr. Brenner. And so that's where I've developed a lot of my own work, is particularly a moral philosophy, is pressing back on that privation theory of evil. In my debate with Trent Horn, my second rebuttal. Trent
I'm sure
Horn
he
was
went that route.
dedicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a large chunk of that was just dedicated to responding to the privation theory of evil.
Yeah. So let's move to, we're coming up on an hour, but I really want to ask you this question before we
Sure.
Can atheists have objective morality, and if so, how should that be grounded, or kind of what's the moral philosophy here?
Yeah. So I think the answer is yes. So and I will also say that it is complicated. So metaethics, can there be something like morality given theism? The answer is obviously yes, because every metaethical position on the table, as far as the broad views, are shared by atheists are in all the camps. So to give a rough and dirty picture, there's the non-cognitivist camp. So the non-cognitivists are nihilists in that they don't believe that there are these moral truths. But they don't believe that moral statements even function as truth statements. So to say that morality is true or false is to just misunderstand morality entirely. There's another camp, the cognitivists. And so that was just characterized the non-cognitivists. The cognitivists say, no, they are truth. They're truth-apt statements. This is how it functions. So all the other camps are cognitivist. And so the nihilists, who are error theorists, say, look, this is how our language functions, but there just are no moral properties. So all of our moral sentences are false. Subjectivists say, look, yeah, there are moral truths, but what makes them true are facts about subjects. So these are the subjectivists. Then there are the naturalists. So the naturalists believe that, look, there are facts about humans that don't depend on our attitudes or responses. And they are what ground our moral facts. And so moral facts just are natural facts. There are no other uniquely moral facts. They're just a special kind of natural fact. And so then there's my camp, the non-naturalist camp. And so the non-naturalist camp is the idea that there are these unique moral properties in the world that are objective, but they cannot be reduced to natural facts. They're their own type of fact. Most people are familiar with this distinction if they've heard of Hume's is-ought distinction. So it's the non-naturalist that says, look, there's a gap between is facts and ought facts. You can't reduce ought facts to is facts and keep Hume's is-ought distinction intact. So guess what the big objection is to the ethical naturalists? All ethical naturalists have to respond to Hume's is-ought distinction. Like that's just, kind of like, if you're going to be an ethical naturalist, you just have to respond to that objection. And so that's kind of the big dividing line. And so an atheist can take any position on this spectrum. And divine command theory, and classical natural law theory find their home in I hate the language of ethical naturalism and ethical non-naturalism, because when you throw in the philosophy of religion, we've put those terms to use elsewhere.
I was just going to say, it sounds like you're a supernaturalist, but...
Yeah, and so it sounds weird to say that the classical theist and the divine command theorist are ethical naturalists, but that's what they are.
You think that the divine command theorist is as well?
Yes, because they're reducing morality to the command, to is facts, what God has commanded, or what God is like. Um,
Oh, it's in
and
God's
so,
nature. Yeah, if you want to play, if that's your escape from the Euthyphro dilemma, which I think is incoherent, but
yeah. And so um, the
I forget about that. That's
the
right.
non-naturalist is going to say, look, moral truths, moral properties are just irreducible. We cannot cash out moral properties in entirely non-moral terms. And so if
So
someone,
is it intuition?
oh yeah, rational intuition, yes.
That's what
So
you
same
would
with
reduce
like
it to?
mathematics and logic. So it's not an empirical. Like I could know all the facts about how to extend human lives hundreds of years in the future. I could know all of the scientific facts about that, and then none of them would tell me whether or not we should um,
But
extend lives hundreds of years in the future. There's no empirical test
why is it
to
not
settle a
subjective
moral
then?
question.
Why is the
Would you say?
view that reduces? Why is the view that reduces to intuition not subjective?
So we're just talking. When you say about intuition, we're just talking about how we come to knowledge of these truths. So by rational
Oh,
intuition. So the same
so
way
it's
that
not
I
our
come,
intuition that makes it true.
correct. Where so
Okay.
if I say that pain is bad,
Yeah.
I'm not making a claim about me or my intuitions. I might be using my intuition to know that pain
Okay.
has this property of badness, but I'm making a
That makes
claim
sense.
about pain.
That
I'm
makes
saying that
sense. Yeah.
pain has a
Sorry. Go.
property, and that property is counting in favor of me not wanting to be in it. Everyone has this pain. Like if I look at pain from the outside, which obviously we can't do completely because our subjective experiences requires us to kind of be locked in our particular perspective. But when I try to examine pain from the outside, if someone were to just hold their hand over a stove just for the sake of holding their hand over their stove, I would say that person has a reason to move their hand. That's not a fact about me. That's not even a fact about their psychology. Their psychology wants them to put their hand on that stove, but I'm saying no. What it's like to be in that state counts in favor of you moving your hand. That is a reason for you to
Yeah.
move your hand. And I think that's an objective way of thinking about reasons. And so using the concept of reasons, we can develop principles. And once we have enough principles, we can have theories about those
What would you
principles.
say?
And we're in normative ethics at that point.
I'm a bit confused, so I'll ask one question that I think might clarify. What would you say the object is that makes moral statements true? If it's objective, what is the object?
So the value is found in the object of judgment. So it can only be one of two places. So if we're talking about value, again, this is where the meta ethics can become very abstract very quick.
Uh-huh.
So if I say that pain is bad, there's only two places that this value, this badness could be. It could either be in the object of my judgment, pain, or it could be in the subject of the judgment, me making the judgment. You see what I'm saying? Now we might branch that, that's simple subjectivism. We might branch that out and say, look, this is how the community responds to pain. Or we might say, this is how God responds to pain. It would increase the numbers of subjects, but the disagreement between subjectivists and objectivists is the order of normative explanation here. Do we explain subjects, the rightness and wrongness of subjects, via the objects of our normative judgments, or do we explain the value of the objects of our judgment by the responses of subjects? So a lot of people think that subjectivists and objectivists disagree about the contents of the world. They don't. They disagree about the order of normative explanation.
Right. I just can't.
It's
I just
tough.
need.
It's
I need to either look
abstract.
into it more, or I'm because in my mind, hearing this, my initial thoughts are, this either reduces to subjectivism, or it's very actually close to what you're calling the naturalist position. because that's what the common denominator is going to be. But that's from my perspective, which is obviously biased towards the naturalist
So people
position.
who are interested in this view, I highly recommend Thomas Nagel's The Last Word.
Interesting
And,
recommendation. I like it. Yeah.
yeah, and so basically the thesis of that book is that we can't get behind reasons. Reasons are fundamental. Reason always has the last word, because there's just no getting behind them. And so once that book really gave me the framework to understand this ethical non-naturalist view that is, Thomas Nagel defends this view as well, but Derek Parfit, Tim Scanlon, if anyone's ever seen The Good Place, the book that they hold up in that book, in that show, What We Owe to Each Other, that's Tim Scanlon. They have this, what's, I'm calling an ethical non-naturalist view. And it's very abstract. It's a very armchair philosophy exercise. And so if you're opposed to armchair philosophy, it might not be that interesting of a project, but if you're really serious about thinking about, meta ethics at its deepest level, those are the guys.
Anything I don't understand is interesting to me, just because I'm such a narcissist. I can't stand it. So I'll be looking into that. Well, Ben, this has been a lot of fun and very fruitful for me, at least, and I'm sure the audience will agree. You've got a few fans in the live chat. I don't know if you can see the screen or not, that I'm throwing the comments up there or not, but you got some fans that I knew
Awesome.
that you would, from the CCV, or from the cross Capturing Christianity. I almost said Cross Canadian Ragweed. That's hilarious. The Capturing Christianity debate you did there, and so I knew you would get quite a following from that. Some of them have come to the live chat. Ben, it's been a lot of fun. Again, I'm very fruitful. I'm very happy that we did this. Look forward to seeing your work, and everyone else over there at the Real Atheology podcast. Seeing where that goes in the future. I'm sure there's only bright days ahead. To the listener, if you enjoyed the show, again, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, leave us a review if you're listening to the podcast. And of course, if you benefit from the show, be sure to go over to the Patreon page, follow the link in the description below, and become a supporter for as little as $1 a month. It's at patreon.com/Haden Clark. And be sure to follow the links in the description over to Ben's website, as well as the YouTube channel and the podcast. Subscribe. Do all of those good things for Ben, because we need more Ben Watkins in the world. And I'm optimistic that there are more up and coming. Ben's less optimistic than I am, but we'll see. Ben, any final words?
Yeah. So I would just encourage everyone to let evidential chips fall where they may, and proportion your beliefs to the evidence, and that you have nothing to lose and everything to gain from an honest pursuit of truth. And that's kind of my plug.
Amen and amen. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it a lot. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.